Great. So just briefly, Kelly comes to us as president of KMS Intercultural Consulting LLC, specializing in global diversity and inclusion, storytelling, cultural competence, social justice, and healing racism. She's facilitated development workshops, trainings, and storytelling presentations for educational, nonprofit, government, and corporate institutions in 15 different countries and on 4 different continents. And without too much further delay, I'd love to have Kelly just jump into what she'd like to share with us about what she's called healing the divides and the importance of doing our own inner work in this particular time and place to be the best facilitators we can be. So Kelly, thank you so much for joining us on this very brief but really important half-hour conversation.
Thank you so much. It is truly a pleasure to be with everybody today. And I'm really delighted to have this conversation about healing the divides, because I don't know that we talk enough about healing and the importance of healing. I think that oftentimes we want to jump straight to the result of a healed community without doing the work of what that means. And so I have 4 steps to offer to you all today, but I need to take you through the process so that you can follow it with me. I want to use myself as an example of how I began to heal the divide that existed within myself between who I was as a Black woman and living in the United States of America, and how there was that constant conflict of wanting to be fully comfortable in my own skin, but yet getting messages from people who look like me and who didn't look like me, um, that I was not enough. And so let me just take you, let me walk you through my experience. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. A long way from home. A long way from home. So I always felt like the US was not home. I always felt like Africa wasn't really home. So where was home for me, right? W.E.B. Du Bois said that one ever feels his two-ness. An American, a Negro, 2 souls, 2 thoughts, 2 unreconciled strivings, 2 warring ideals in one dark body, whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. And Ralph Ellison says in The Invisible Man that I am invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me. Like the bodiless heads you see sometimes in circus sideshows, it's as though I have been surrounded by mirrors of hard, distorting glass. When they approach me, they see only my surroundings, themselves, or figments of their imagination. Indeed, everything and anything except me. So you'll understand when I tell you that part of healing the divides is about the ability to be able to see others, to be able to see them, truly see them. There is a greeting out of the Swahili language that says Sawubana. Sawubana means I see you, we see you. And then the appropriate response is Yebo Sawubana, meaning yes, we see you too. So I will never forget that there was a time when I saw the movie Avatar and the greeting was, I see you. And I melted to my core and I told my husband, I was like, I really love that. Why don't we do that? Because there's something truly about not just being seen from the physicality from the outside of you. When someone says, I see you, you feel that they mean that they see the inside of you, that they see the core of you, the essence of you. And the way that we can begin to see one another, truly see one another, is through the power of story. And so I have to tell you, the storytelling helped me along my journey to healing. It was therapeutic for me, and I found it to be therapeutic for the listener as well. One of the tools and one of the things that I'm telling everybody about right now is the power of story listening. Story listening. We talk a lot about storytelling, right? People are out there telling stories and the organizational story and how to, connect to your story in the workplace and etc. And all of that's important. And let me tell you, I'm one of the main ones out there telling everybody that. But the other thing is about story listening. And that's critical because if we don't engage in the process of story listening, then we can't get to that place of transformation. And so when I say transformation, I don't mean trans with an S, transformation, like when I'm listening to your story, I fall into a trance. I go to a different place. I am transported to someplace else so that I can begin to step inside of your experience and understand you a little bit more. So the whole process for me of healing the divides starts with storytelling and learning the skill of story listening. The four steps that I mentioned to you earlier are about number one is really to acknowledge the wounds and tell your story, right? Healing the divide, acknowledge the wound and tell your story. So if that wound is a personal wound, it could be a social wound, it could be a national wound, but tell the story. So if I use myself as an experience, I have to acknowledge the wound, right? I have to acknowledge that in my experience, I have been hurt by people who look like me and people who didn't look like me. And I had to find a sense of identity within that, right? So if I felt invisible, or if I felt like a caricature, or if I felt incomplete and misunderstood, I had to somehow connect with what is my story? How can I assert who it is that I find myself to be? So a few years ago, I had to acknowledge the wound, and I did so by writing a poem. I'd like to share that with you. I am Black, African American, woman, but not free. I have been chained to an image that doesn't begin to reflect me. I'm a hypersexualized Jezebel, ignorant and mean. I'm the loving mammy whose sexuality is yet to be seen. Funny though, nothing in between. Hell yeah, I'm mad, but I'm not mean. Just sick and tired of what's happening. I've spent my life fighting images that make me feel less than. I'm tired of my hair being a point of contention. I'm tired of my culture being feared, but copied at length. Our music, style, and speech, Lord, give me the strength to walk through life with my head held high, knowing who I am and never bothering to try to be someone else who they want me to be, because that doesn't resonate with my identity. I am who I am, Black, but not free. Just like my people who arrived in 1619, stripped of their language and dignity, stripped of their clothes and virginity, forced to stand by while their children are sold, whipped bloody when my brother dared to be bold, raped constantly until my body was too old, providing backbreaking labor until thrown in an unmarked grave, nursing white babies from Black breasts until that Black babies would crave, picking cotton from dusk till dawn, but accused of being lazy. And to ask for justice for this history, I'm looked at like I'm crazy. It's funny that race massacres have been termed race riots, like those in Chicago, Harlem, Tulsa, and Watts. All acts of terrorism from the oppressor more often than not. We've been told our faults are pathological, but they were created by those who benefit from our hopes and dreams deflated. I wish that Dr. King's dream would someday come true. I wish that the bill for justice wasn't way past due. I wish that we could really just get over it, but it won't be got over until it's dealt with. I wish that Trayvon Martin and the Browns didn't have to lose a son. I live in fear that my son will be the next one. No parent should ever have to put their child in a grave. I wish those young brothers could have been saved. I wish I could help people understand that racism is real and to the racist be damned. So we've turned this crap inward and started believing what we've been called all along: lazy, ignorant, unachieving, suppressing our beauty with skin bleaches and shit, ashamed of our full curves and our lips and our hips, burning our scalps with chemicals that melt concrete. I wish to look like Barbie made my Christmas list complete. needing the validation of our oppressors for permission to succeed, but watching less others qualified passing me by makes my eyes want to bleed. From slavery to Reconstruction to Jim Crow and civil rights, from the lynching of Emmett Till, James Byrd, Breonna Taylor, and James George Floyd, who do we fight? So grateful for my parents instilling pride to be Black. Though it took me years, I will never go back. This circle of oppression makes my head want to spin. History repeating itself, though we've said never again. History repeating itself, though we've said never again. History repeating itself, though we said never. And here we go again. So I wanted to share that story with you, or my poem, because I feel strongly that we have to acknowledge the wound and tell your story. That's me telling my story as a Black woman, from Black people looking at me, from other people looking outside at me. And for me, how was I looking at myself, right? I've mentioned Barbie. So I have to acknowledge that wound and tell my story. But then the next step is to clean the wound, right? The cure for the pain is in the pain, my mentor would say. So you got to clean the wound. I did my graduate internship at the Center for the Healing of Racism, and they had a dialogue racism program that really invited us to dig into the way that racism plays out and harms everyone, every single person. This system of racism does not leave a victim out, including those that would be self identified or identified as the oppressor. Racism hurts everyone. So, in order for us to understand the way that we have all been hurt, we have to get into the pain. And as a culture of people who are very averse to wanting to get to the uncomfortable of our story and our identity, this is one of the most painful things that we have to do. But if we really want to heal, we must clean the wound. So, we have to get into it, we have to open it up. We have to face the pain of that. That's number three, face the pain, right? So if one is acknowledge the wound, two is clean the wound, three is face the pain, right? So we're afraid, we don't want to get into that pain. We have to um, be willing to be uncomfortable in order to examine how this is showing up for us. So we have to research our history. We need to revisit the messages from our youth, right? We need to revisit how hurt people. So if I am in a space where I am deeply hurt, then I have to be really aware of my engagement with others, both those who I believe hurt me and people who look like me, because sometimes it's easier to lash out at the people who surround you because you feel like that's a more forgivable offense, right? So that's where we hear this, well, can we talk about Black on Black crime? Can we talk about this or can we talk about that? That happens from within a culture. Um, but we have to talk about how hurt people and why are they hurt. So we have to examine that history and we have to examine those messages that we've received. Number four is about recognizing that we are all infected by the disease, right? Disease, if you break it down, it means dis, or it's separated into dis-ease, right? So racism is a dis-ease. It's a dis-ease with one another. It's a dis-ease within the system. It is a fear of the other. We have to recognize how we have all been infected by it. Now, it is not our fault that we have been infected, but it is our responsibility to get better. And how do we get better, right? How do we get better? We have to first acknowledge the wound, tell our story, clean the wound, face the pain. But we cannot begin to get better until we're willing to do all of that and recognize how we've all been impacted. The other thing that when I say we all have been infected by the disease is to recognize that we are also in this place of when people have been marginalized or have not had access to opportunity, then we begin to buy into this notion of competition for scarce resources. So some of that disease is about keeping, the people who are fighting for scraps, fighting one another for the scraps, right? Instead of trying to um, challenge those who are at the table with the turkey and and all the other yummy bits. um, and so, in order for us to avoid taking it out on ourselves and each other and other people, then we have to be willing to recognize that we have all been infected by that. And so, for people like myself, I need to acknowledge the shame, the embarrassment, the sense of abandonment, um, and and in many ways the desire to be something that more closely aligns with the oppressor, right? Because all people who have been conquered, colonized, or enslaved struggle with issues of colorism, struggle with issues of adopting ways of the dominant to be seen as more professional, to be seen as more beautiful. And so we have to recognize how that has impacted us all and begin to dismantle that disease. And then the fifth part of that is commit to the oneness of humanity. Commit to the oneness of humanity, right? Mother Teresa says there is no peace because we have forgotten that we belong to each other. We've forgotten that we belong to each other. A friend of mine, Don, wrote a poem some time ago. It was a beautiful poem that he wrote after seeing myself at a conference and another colleague of mine who is from Lebanese ancestry and another colleague who is from Indigenous First Nations ancestry. And and he is of European American ancestry. But he wrote this beautiful poem about how we all started in one place. And when we needed to have greater access to food and we wanted to explore, then some stayed behind in Africa. And that was my family, Kelly's family. He referred to it. And then he said, and we moved on and we moved further north. And then he said, and then we got to a place where we felt comfortable. And then Layla stayed behind, and Layla is of Lebanese ancestry, right? And then he goes on and he talks about how went further and we finally made it across the shores into the into North America and for the indigenous people of North America, and how he came into contact with this colleague and how she stayed there, and he then went on to Europe, and over time we forgot that we were not of the same family and began to see one another as threats to each other's survival. But if we remembered that we all began in the same place, then much of that violence, that fear of the other, that suspicion of the stranger would be minimized significantly. So if we commit to this oneness of humanity, we have a better chance of being willing to tell our stories and to listen to others and recognize how we are more connected to each other than we are not. So when I see you and I say Sawubana, I would love it if I could hear you say Yebo Sawubana back. So I know that that was brief, but I definitely wanted to leave some time for question and answers. And I, again, just to walk you through it once more, in order for us to heal those divides, we have to, one, acknowledge the wound. We have to, two, clean our wound. We have to, three, face the pain. Number four, we have to recognize that we are all infected by this disease, and we need to avoid the oppression Olympics of mine is worse than yours. And then we have to commit to the oneness of humanity and realize that um, we really are family. And while there are some significant differences between us all, that we really should work harder to be able to see ourselves in the other. So um, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it as the storyteller I am. So I want to open this back up to Marcia. Marcia, are there any questions that came through or thoughts or?
And I actually want to go ahead and jump to Shirley because I think she has to scoot off too. But Shirley, it looks like you wanted to share something.
Yeah, Kelly, I've been a huge fan of yours for a very long time, and I follow you on LinkedIn. And I know that in the past I've been wanting to like collaborate with you. So this is such an honor time for me to like actually see you and hear your poems and the way that you approach facilitation of these difficult and courageous conversations. So I want to say in Lakesh, which in Mayan means I see you and you are the other me. And others say that you are the mirror of me or you're my mirror. And so I'm from Guatemala. I was born and raised there until I was 11 years old. I came to United States in the 70s. And so I'm on my journey of decolonizing myself, my mind, the healing of that decolonization or that colonization mind frame that most immigrants bring to this country and continue to perpetuate that racist structure. And so I would love to talk to you off another time on how we can collaborate on that. But I would love to have this recording too and be part of you all somehow. We need to continue this. So we can do this again. I would love to, but I have a class to go to. So I apologize.
Thank you so much for coming, and I really appreciate you sharing the way that we mirror one another from your language. Will you mind just dropping that in the chat, because I want to capture that. Please spell that for me, because I'll butcher it.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
thank you so much for that. I appreciate you, and I do look forward to connecting.
Yes, of course.
Thank you, Shirley. And we will be making the recording available. So we'll send that to you after we finalize it and do a little bit of our editing magic to it. And we'll get it to you as soon as we can.
Thank
But
you.
Thank you.
I'll be here another 5 minutes, but
This
Great.
was such a short, sweet, powerful presentation. Just the blend of the emotion, the weaving of the stories. It came as a blow on your um, emotions, on your feelings and senses, right? And that's, I think, that the power of sharing the story and the power of listening. Can you bring it in? Can you let
Mhm.
it vibrate inside and move you to action,
Mhm.
move you
Yeah.
to self reflection, introspection, and then to doing something about it, rather than that fear, 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 or constant the framework of seeing each other's as a competition,
Yes.
professionally, individually, friendship wise. This is what we absolutely have to abandon as human beings. And
Mhm.
all of the conversions of the very heavy stuff that has happened over the past year and a half is just begging for us to tap back into the real simplicity of being human.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
as I'm hearing you speak, Kelly, and it's just touched me so deeply because as my background is I'm indigenous. I'm a enrolled member of Santa Clara Pueblo in New Mexico, and my mother immigrated to the States from Brazil. So I have, those lineages, and then even more through family and all that. So it's the power of story is incredibly important to me and my family. That's how we keep both our healing and our resilience at the forefront. And I think that that's what I'm so encouraged by seeing now is that voices that have been silenced are now alive and awake and saying those stories. And here's my question for you. The challenge is that in storytelling and story listening,
Mm.
it depends on both the person being able to share and another one being able to listen. And in
Mhm.
this day and age, it feels like we're losing the capacity to listen. How
Mhm.
have you found the spaces, the times, the connections in order to have those stories actually heard?
So thank you. One of the I was just talking. I don't know if this is going to answer your question, but it's where my heart is being pulled to. So forgive me. But I was talking to my husband the other day, and I said, you know what? I don't know if we will ever truly get this right until we allow, as practitioners of this work, until we truly give a space for people who don't feel as if they are a part of the diversity conversation to tell us their story too.
Mhm.
So when I have just started working as an interim executive director of diversity, equity, and inclusion at the University of Tulsa here, and I told the president, I said the very first thing that I want to do is that, thank you. The very first thing that I want to do is to go directly to the fraternities on campus, because what I was hit by was that um in South Carolina or Charleston, when they were protesting, they were, with their tiki torches were saying, "You will not replace us."
Hmm.
There is something in the psyche of that community that feel as if this diversity and this push towards inclusion somehow pushes them out, right? And you've heard the statement that said, for those who have enjoyed a great deal of privilege, equity feels like oppression. And so if that's true, I don't want to dismiss that, because that I don't want anybody to feel, the receiving end of oppression. That's the whole reason why I do what I do. I don't want you to feel that. So my intention, what I plan to do, is to have some real conversations and be in a space of story listening with the fraternities on campus, and our the white male fraternity specifically, um, and even many of the white female sororities, and our young Republicans on campus, because I know that there is a movement from within that political community that feels as if we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion and racial justice, that it somehow is ignoring their process and their journey,
Mhm.
and particularly those who feel as if they have also been targeted. So so while it's easy for many of us as practitioners, and I've seen many of us do it, dismiss that when a white man says, "I feel like white men are being targeted now," and then they, right? And every time it hits me in my gut, and I'm like, I want to know his story. I want to know what's going on and how he feels as if he is being marginalized or out othered now, because I know what that feels like and I don't want it for anybody else. So, and I feel like if I can have that conversation and be willing to listen, even in through the pain, because it's going to be some painful stuff said that will trigger me as well, right? But if I can remain engaged with a desire to connect to the oneness of humanity, then I'm going to find ways to connect those ties. And so, for example, I work with police departments as well. And so, one of the police departments that I work with has said that, well, not one of them, they have all said, we feel targeted. We feel like everybody is reducing us to this one story, this one ideal of what a bad police officer is. And that's not me. That's not me. And that's not the people I know. And I said, you know who else says that all the time? Black folks, brown folks. We all have said, everybody is looking at us like we are somehow the bad guy all the time. And we're dangerous and we're scary and we are violent. Um, and that's not me. And that's not the people that I know. So if that's true for you, recognize how it's true for me. And how can we be so that the other one can be free, right? So there's this beautiful statement from the Center for Global Oneness, and he says, how do I have to be in order for you to be free? What do I have to be in order for you to be free? Right? So it's saying that I want to take some responsibility of why you feel as if you are being oppressed, right? So because of that, that's why I want to approach, the young white men who may be feeling this. I don't want to make an assumption that that's how they're feeling, right? But if there are some, I want to know, how can I, particularly with the work that I want to do at the university specifically, how can I let them feel seen and invite them into this process of truly being an inclusive space and truly being an inclusive campus? That also means, when we say inclusion, we're talking about the white guys too, right? So I don't know if that got
No,
to the point,
makes
but
sense, and
Yeah,
I
amazing.
hope that we'll see more of that very specific space in terms of the hard conversation to have, because it almost is it's flipping, like the white privileged people are flipping it because they're seeing it as a threat to themselves. But
Mhm.
in this space, I think what is another missing piece of the patchwork that we need to hammer down more is
Mhm.
the neuroscience and fear. If
Oh,
we
sure.
understand from a brain perspective, why do we feel fear? What happens when we feel threatened? No matter what kind of threat, whether it's the shark in front of me, whether it's the tiger that is gonna eat me, or this notion of I'm gonna lose my place of supremacy, right? And still deconstruct that to bring it to an understanding that is visceral,
Yeah.
to visceral. Then I think is when we might see that difference we want to see, especially within the segments of some younger generations that are the future, that will, if caught early from their socialized brainwashing, let's say it, maybe, the future will be a little bit brighter and a little bit more just and equal.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I want to say, because I know we're getting close to time, how I appreciate really that you've outlined a process. And I think that that's something that a lot of folks in all facets of the work of social justice and advocacy sometimes don't allow ourselves to go through a process. And it's very natural to go through the awareness piece first of, oh my God, this is the impact of, colonialism, of racism, of any ism on me, right? And to go through those stages of anger, of shame, of sadness, of feeling less than, feeling invisible, to a point where you find whatever it is you need, whether that's anger, whether that's whatever emotion it is that propels you into another place of healing, right? And finding wherever that place is to work on that healing for yourself. It shouldn't be seen as a luxury. It's a necessity. As you've said, hurt people hurt people. And I really appreciate you naming, because I think it validates the need for us to really do our own work, as you've said, so that we can be there for others. Because really, from what you're saying, you've gone through your own process in order to be able to be present with folks in a very different way. I mean, it's very brave what you're going to do, is step into these environments where I don't know what stories are going to come back at you. But, all of us, I think, have to feel like we need to be strong within ourselves and choose our own fights in this area, right? And do what we're ready to do. So I appreciate all those 5 steps, because it just outlines to me, a process rather than, an end point, right? Which is where people are, I think, sometimes get stuck, is the I have tos or I shoulds.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Excellent.
So
Thank you.
saying that, thank you so much for this brief moment, but just beautiful sharing. I love what you brought to us, and you transported us, and I really appreciate it. And for those that weren't able to be here in person, we are, this is going to live on as a recording, so we'll send it all to everyone that registered, and they'll be able to hear your words as well, and be part of the experience. So thank you. Totally.
Thank you all. It's my pleasure. We'll see you again soon.
Bye bye.
I know.